joining Gwinnett County Public Library. Today's program is Empowering Independent Futures with our presenter, Anna Mackey of Bobby Dodd Institute. My name is Amy Perry, and I'm an adult service specialist with the library. Please welcome Anna Mackey.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out today. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. So I'm going to go over a few slides that will help provide some context for our conversation tonight, but I want to be sure to leave some time available to answer any questions that you have. I do want to just put a caveat out there that particularly for families who are going through some transition, you have your loved one who's turning 18, there's a lot to think about, and it's very, very overwhelming. So I want this to be a safe zone for you to get all of your questions answered, but recognize that if you're feeling overwhelmed, you're probably in the right spot, because that means that you are looking at a lot of different things that you probably should be focused on. But we do want to make sure that as we go through this process, that we normalize that and give you the appropriate resources and empower you to be able to create those transition plans and look at all of those resources to maximize the type of future that you want for your loved one. So just to jump in with this, let's see, hold on one second. I'm running into a little difficulty trying to get my slides to move here. Hold on, there we go. So just a quick introduction. My name is Anna Mackey. I work at the Bobby Dodd Institute. I'm the Director of Benefits Navigation there. I started the Benefits Navigation back in 2016 when we were all about developmental disabilities, and 2018 AADD merged with the Bobby Dodd Institute, which created a great opportunity to take this program statewide. So we've been able, since the inception of the program, we have served more than 1,200 families and secured more than $240 million in benefits for families. A lot of people ask, why do you do what you do? I do have a wonderful background that equipped me to do a lot of this work, but the real purpose is my son. I live this, and he's 29 now, and he has autism and a moderate intellectual disability, and he lives the good life. And I love using his story as a success story because it reveals the opportunity that's out there. He is, here I am hanging out with y'all this evening. He's out bowling with his friends. That's awesome. He's going to spend the night. We have a community living arrangement. He has a roommate, has a care provider. Tomorrow he goes to work. This is living the dream, guys, to live, work, and play in the community. And so being able to have a program like this helps to pave that pathway for you as well, so that you can see what all is out there, how you pull all those resources together and develop a life plan that meets not just the needs of your loved one, but their goals and their dreams as well. So some of the takeaways that we want tonight, I want to make sure that you're familiar with all the different government agencies. So knowing where the resources are is half the battle to acquire those resources. So we want to look at the agencies. We want to focus on what services are available, with particular support, emphasis on family support services, making sure that if you're eligible, that you're looking at that NowComp Medicaid Waiver planning list, Social Security, and GVRA. And then we'll also mention some other futures planning issues. Again, looking at where are you now, and then having an eye towards the future. What are those things that you need to do, and how do you safeguard your loved one's future? So we'll be talking about all those things tonight. Again, I'm a mom, I live this too. Waking up in the middle of the night wondering, who's going to be there, who's going to be making these decisions, who's going to be coordinating care, is he going to be okay? That's, I think, what every parent worries about. And so creating a plan, developing a life care plan that's inclusive of benefits and resources, I think is a good methodology to turn what could be panic into a plan and I think through that process, make it a little more likely that you're going to have the resources necessary. When I think about what every individual is going to need, they're going to need three things. They're going to need some form of income, some form of health insurance, and some level of services. And so when we look at those three things, Social Security is actually addressing the first two. When the individual turns 18 and they're eligible to apply for supplemental security income on their own, that's going to be a needs-based program that's going to provide some level of income. The maximum award now here in 2022 was $841 a month. With SSI comes Medicaid. So with Social Security, you have your income and you have your primary health insurance. Over time, you transition from SSI to SSDI, the Social Security Disability Insurance. Again, you'll have that income, which is usually higher, because at that point in time, they're able to pull off your work record, which is awesome. And then 24 months later, they'll be eligible for Medicare. So income and health insurance generally tied with Social Security, but then what services are there? And typically when we talk about services, I'm talking about primarily those services to help you access the community and to live independently. So those are typically community living support types of services that are usually funded through programs sponsored by the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. So these are the things that we're really going to focus on and try to deep dive a little bit more into tonight. So let's again recap what agencies are out there. So if you were doing a tour and looking at all of these different buildings, where would you be going? You'd be going first to the Department of Education. So an individual can stay in the school system until they're age 22. And quite frankly, the other agencies, particularly the Department of Health, they're going to be expecting the Department of Education to be that primary provider of services and resources until that individual ages out at 22. So the Department of Education is going to be a critical resource for you, critical agency. So having the right IEP in place, making sure that you're getting the appropriate therapies through the school setting is going to be very, very important. Likewise, the Department of Health, there are some programs through the Department of Health that you can access when you're younger, when they're children. But then especially as they're transitioning into adulthood, you're really looking at maximizing services through the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. And those are primarily family support services while you're on the planning list to receive a now comp Medicaid waiver. So these are very, very important services. If you have a loved one with a developmental intellectual disability and they're over the age of 3 and they're not on a waiver yet, they should be looking at family support services. And this is even true even while you're in school. And then, of course, there's the Department of Labor. This is the Georgia Vocational Rehabilitation Agency. And this is an agency that's focusing on work supports. So a lot of times people think, okay, work, that means that starts at age 18. And actually, you can start earlier than that. So to get your loved ones some services to help promote job readiness, some social work adjustment that can be appropriate. So familiarize yourself with the agencies and with the different services that they offer. And of course, Social Security is its standalone provider of that income and health insurance. I want to focus and do a deep dive on family support. And I want to do that for 2 reasons. One, because it's the most easily accessible service. And secondly, it's a gateway towards a higher level of service. So when you think about the services through the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities, these are all, again, all services. So it begins at the lowest level is the family support services, and then it graduates to a now waiver, and then the highest level of service would be the comprehensive waiver. So an individual who's receiving a comp waiver is probably getting between $50,000, $70,000 worth of services per year. A now waiver, probably around the $20,000, $30,000 mark per year. Family support is a steep decline. That's up to only $3,000 in services per year. And here's the thing, if you're on the planning list for a now comp waiver, and that's based on who's most in need to actually get awarded a waiver, you need to make sure you're maximizing all other available resources, which means you need to avail yourself of family support services. So because we're all here in Gwinnett County, you do have multiple providers of family support services in Gwinnett County. So you can only have one provider. So you could choose In Community. In Community is one of the largest family support services providers in the metro Atlanta. I think Viewpoint Health is still providing family support services in Gwinnett. And then BDI also provides family support services in Gwinnett County, as well as for other counties in metro Atlanta. What's curious about BDI is BDI does provide both intensive family support and traditional family support. And we're actually the only provider of intensive family support. What does that mean? What's the difference between intensive family support and traditional family support? Traditional family support is generally construed as up to $3,000 in funding, typically for things like community recreation and integration, to pay for summer camps, or to pay for specialized medical supplies like diapers and things like that. If you qualify for intensive family support services, that means that there's more of a critical need for services, so you're eligible for a higher level of service in that regard. So I would certainly, especially if you're facing some critical need, that you would want to look at that opportunity to have intensive level services. The eligibility requirements for family support, this is universal, whether it's BDI, In Community, no matter what county you are, the family support eligibility requirements are the same. So you need to have a documented eligible developmental intellectual disability. Well, what does that mean? So generally the documentation comes from a psychological evaluation. Every now and again, I'll see really good school IEPs that have done a good job of incorporating some of the standardized scores from psychological assessments into the IEP, but typically the Department of Behavioral Health, like most government agencies, they want to see the documentation with numbers. So having a letter of medical verification from a psychiatrist is not going to be as effective a means of documentation as having a psychological assessment that's either performed at the school or through a private provider that includes scores, that includes numbers. And so the numbers that they're looking at, which are pretty much the same for whether or not it's eligible for family support services or that now comp waiver, they're looking to see, do you have an intellectual disability? And that's looking at that full scale IQ with a cutoff score below 70. So if you're in that less than first percentile with your cognitive function, then you're going to be eligible for these services. If that full scale IQ is higher, let's say that individual has like a low or even a low average IQ of 85, not even borderline, then if that individual has extremely low adaptive function, meaning that the global adaptive composite score through a standardized assessment like a Vineland adaptive behavior assessment, for example, if that score is less than 70, then you're going to be eligible. So there's some pretty, significant thresholds for eligibility for these services. I've had individuals who had a specific learning disability and ADHD, and when you combine those together, it creates an impact for that individual, but that does not meet the standard necessary for family support services or now comp waiver. They're really looking at an established intellectual disability or a condition that's closely related to an intellectual disability like cerebral palsy or autism, and looking for accompanying low adaptive functioning scores. So those are the eligibility requirements. So what are these services and how does that application process look like? So every county in Georgia has a family support services provider. So you identify your provider, and again, in Gwinnett, that could be BDI, it could be In Community, it could be Viewpoint Health. So you identify the provider, you complete the application for services, it gets forwarded to the state. The state reviews the documentation that you put with it, which is usually that psychological evaluation. You sign a family support services agreement, which is basically assuring two things. One, that you only have one family support services provider, and two, that when you receive a Medicaid waiver, that you recognize that family support ends at that point. So you're basically eligible for family support services until you have the funding available for a now comp waiver. So then, okay, you're approved. What happens next? Woohoo, you get the letter of approval. Then you're going to develop an individual support plan. And these support plans are based on what your needs are. So what do you really need? Well, a lot of the individuals need social skill development. They need an opportunity to develop friendships. They need an opportunity to be out in the community. So one of the most common services that we see is this social recreation community integration. And again, this is funding summer camps, social skills programs, other community activities like a gym membership or swim lessons or hippotherapy or things like that. Some individuals need to have somebody in the home with them. So let's say you're working full time and you don't get home till 6 and your kid gets home at 4. What are you going to do in those 2-hour blocks? Well, if you have somebody who can provide some care during that time, that might be an opportunity for some community living support. Community access group, that's a fancy way of saying day program. So when your individual ages out of the school system and maybe they would benefit from a day program that's focused on adaptive and functional life skills, as well as some pre-vocational and community skill development, then the family support services can help provide some support for that as well. One of the most common utilizations of family support services is to pay for specialized medical supplies, incontinence supplies, like nutrition and things like that. When I say nutrition, I mean like formula for individuals who have a G tube or GJ tube. And you would think that that would be paid for by Medicaid, that you have an individual who's, let's say, 20 years old, and they have SSI and Medicaid, but Medicaid doesn't always pay for this. So I would strongly encourage you to tap into family support services so that way you just kind of ease some of that financial burden, while again, also demonstrating that you're availing yourself of all available resources, which helps move you closer to that most in need status necessary to actually receive an award. So it's a very big difference from being eligible for a now comp waiver and being awarded that waiver. And there's only 100 waivers awarded each year with 7,000 people on the planning list. So it gets kind of tricky there. Let's talk just a little bit more about Medicaid waivers. There's different forms of waivers. When we talk about the deeming waiver, that's not services. This is the Katie Beckett waiver. This is access to Medicaid. So if you have a loved one who is a child, before they turn 18 and they have would benefit from at least 5 different therapies a week, and your income is too high to be eligible for SSI, then you can apply for the deeming waiver to have access to Medicaid to help support the cost of those therapies. The elderly and disabled waiver, this is primarily home health. The Georgia Pediatric Program, GAP, this is a program that's generally earmarked for individuals, the children with skilled nursing needs. So think having this skilled help, maybe suctioning a trach, required repositioning. We have some individuals who are medically fragile. Parents can't take care of their children 24/7. I know it feels like it, but you got to sleep sometimes. So having that GAP program may allow for having some support in the home to make sure that that 24/7 hour care is met. Community care services program, generally when individuals receive GAP, they're going to age out of GAP and into the community care services program. This is more that skilled nursing care for adults, not children. The independent care waiver program is very similar to the now comp waiver. Typically, I see ICWP awarded to individuals who have physical limitations, but not cognitive limitations. So somebody needs a personal aid to transfer in and out of their wheelchair, to get out and about in the community, but they don't have an intellectual disability. So those individuals frequently receive independent care waiver and can get those supports to provide access at home and in the community. Likewise, individuals who have a diagnosis of a traumatic brain injury, those individuals are also eligible for an independent care waiver. Generally, if you have one of those eligible diagnoses for intellectual disability or developmental disability, as we talked about before, where the full scale IQ is below 70, or if the IQ is above 70 with that adaptive functioning score below 70, then that individual is going to be eligible for more comprehensive services through the now called Medicaid waiver. And again, these services, look, they're strikingly similar to the same things that you would see under family support. It's because it's all in the same family of services. It's just what level. So community living support, it's the same service, but you would have up to $3,000 through family support. And with the now waiver, the comp waiver caps out self-directed CLS at $51,000 a year. So big difference there. So having that waiver is really the way to maximize independent living for down the road. Community access group or community access individual. So community access individuals, having that care provider to having that companion assistance when in the community, going to bowling individually, not as a group, going to Dave & Buster's, going to, fill in the blank, wherever that is in the community. Not work related, because that's supported employment. That's a different service area, but just to access the community, that's community access group or individual. Behavioral support is also provided. So, if there's a need to have develop a behavior intervention plan and do some supports there. Respite is a core service. If you have a comp waiver, you can get up to 30 days of respite per year. And then the community residential alternative, that comp waiver is the only waiver that allows for this particular service, community residential alternative. That's a group home or a host home. So this is care that's 24/7 out in the community, not in the individual's home. Community living support service, that's in your home. So if I have a care provider come out to the house and hang out with my son, that's going to be community living support. He's helping him with laundry. He's going to help, make sure he gets his shower, make sure he gets his meds. That's community living support. If he is in another home, not our home, let's say it's a group home and it's 24/7 care, that's community residential alternative. You can't self-direct community residential alternative. That is a service that's only provided through an agency. So I mentioned that 7,000 plus planning list number. Yikes. Keep in mind, that is mostly children. Okay. So I would love to see the breakout of what the ages are on that planning list, but I do know the majority are children. Having said that, again, if they're only doing 100, 150 waivers a year, ooh, that's not very many, because we're talking about the entire state. So how do they make that award, and how do you get yourself closer to the top of that award? So developing an advocacy strategy that's highlighting what your loved one's needs are. And that's the difference that you see, like most IEPs, they're very strengths-based. I have so many documents about my son, Eric is a delightful child, Eric is a charming child, Eric's a handsome young man. Like, yeah. But he's a handsome young man who has meltdowns. He's a handsome young man who requires a lot of support to manage his day and to help him regulate and to help ensure his safety and well-being. So when you focus on your advocacy strategy, you focus on what those needs are, of how dangerous it would be for him to be at home by himself, because he'd get bored and he'd leave and wander. And he's a big guy now, and so what's going to happen in 2022 when some 6 foot 240-pound guy starts wandering in your neighborhood? Somebody's going to call the cops, right? So that's a great way to demonstrate that level of need. You want to avoid any engagement with law enforcement. You want to maximize the safety and health and well-being of the individual. So if you can demonstrate that absent these services, that safety is compromised, that there's a risk of law enforcement activity, then that's going to move you closer to that most in need. So advocacy strategies are very much like a thumbprint. They're very unique to the person. So it's a matter of going through a process to determine what those actual supports really are. You know, when I see people, I need a waiver, I need a waiver, I need a waiver. And I'm going to call every week until I get a waiver. And I'm like, that's not advocacy, that's nagging. You know, it's a matter of being very specific with what your request is, doing the analysis to figure out what you need. So, you know, I need a waiver versus I need 30 hours of community access group services plus 20 hours of community living support plus 10 days of respite. This is what's going to help us get by. Very, very different request. So having that specificity with awareness and knowledge of what these supports and services are is really critical to that advocacy strategy, as well as, again, demonstrating that you're utilizing all other available resources like family support. So make sure you apply for family support. In addition to family support, you want to look at voc rehab services. You want to look at, I know In Community has a separate respite program. So respite is a service under family support, but it's also a standalone program through In Community. So maximizing all of these other resources and then showing that gap analysis, like, look, we're doing this and this and this and this, and we have all of these issues, and here are the support needs. This is what he really needs, and here's our gap analysis. See how you're building a stronger case towards demonstrating most in need status. So that's your strategy. You got to have a strategy. Let's talk just real briefly about Social Security. A lot of folks don't know the difference between SSI and SSDI, so I want to make sure that that's a big takeaway for you. SSI is Supplemental Security Income. SSDI is Social Security Disability Insurance. SSI is the needs-based program. Generally, individuals who are applying for SSI have never worked or have never worked enough to earn enough work credits where they would be eligible for SSDI. SSDI is working at a level where you're earning work credits, you're paying into that Social Security Trust Fund. When, if I were to get hit by a bus tonight and I were to take disability, I would be receiving SSDI on my work record. And not only would I be receiving that because my son is an adult dependent child, he would be eligible for 50% off of my work record as a child disability beneficiary. So generally what you see is an individual is going to start with SSI when they turn 18, and then as their parent either becomes disabled or retires or dies, then they're going to be eligible for benefits through their parent's work record. And that's, again, that Social Security Disability Insurance. SSI is tied to Medicaid, SSDI is tied to Medicare. These programs are radically different. They're very, very different. The only thing they have in common is that the fact that they're both managed through Social Security and that the medical determination of eligibility is the same. So how do you know what that medical determination of eligibility is? What's the eligibility criteria? That's the Blue Book. So if, let's say your loved one is 17, next year you're going to look at applying for SSI. What do you need to show to get approved? And we've all heard the horror stories of how long it takes. It's because people don't always provide the appropriate medical documentation. They don't know what's required. So if an individual has Down syndrome, they simply need to show that genetic lab report. Got Down syndrome, check. And that is a much simpler process than if an individual has autism. And if they have autism, they're going to have to demonstrate the diagnosis of autism. Yep, there's qualitative and quantitative deficits and verbal communication, you know, restricted interest, stereotypical behaviors, yada, yada. Plus, and here's the kicker, they're going to have to show diminished mental residual functional capacity. That means you're going to have documentation showing significant limitations in one or moderate limitations in two of the following things. That would be understanding, processing, and memory, social interaction, adaptability. That'd be like coping with stress or, you know, changes in your routine, and concentration, persistence, and pace. So if you don't have the documentation to demonstrate those gaps, you're going to get denied. So that's why it's important to understand what the criteria is and to make sure that you are gathering the appropriate medical documentation that meets that criteria. So If you're not sure, just Google Social Security Blue Book and then put the diagnosis in there, and then bada bing, it's going to pop up what those requirements are. You can now apply online. If you go to ssa.gov, you'll see a link for SSI. You can click on that, you can apply. What happens when you apply online is it's 99% of the application is actually online, but then you actually have to mail in the release. And I also encourage people to mail in the medical documentation at the same time. So you mail that in, and then you get a call from the intake team. And remember, SSI is needs-based, so they're going to have to do that financial eligibility screening first. Before you go to disability determination services for the medical adjudication, they want to see, are you financially eligible? And that means that you can't have, it's two things. You can't have the individual, the 18-year-old, can't have more income than the SSI award itself. And child support counts as income, so that can be a factor. And the individual can't have more than $2,000 in resources. Remember, Medicaid is associated with SSI. And if you're on this track where you think you're going to need a Medicaid waiver, guess what? You're always going to have to maintain Medicaid eligibility, which means that you're going to have to always limit those resources that are available. So once an individual has completed their application online, sent in that release, sent in the medical documentation, had that phone call with the intake team, confirming, nope, the individual's not working, nope, they don't have child support, they don't have any form of income, and we don't have, and there's a whole long list of questions about the financial eligibility. No, we don't have mineral rights, there's not a pension, they haven't worked in the military, there's no royalties, haven't won the lottery, yeah. No. So then they're determined financially eligible because they don't have resources that are exceeding that $2,000 mark. At that point in time, they check the financial eligibility box and move them over to disability determination services for that medical adjudication, that determination of whether or not the condition is severe enough to prevent the individual from working. And that's a process that takes a little bit of time. It used to take about 4 months prior to the pandemic. Now it's more like 8 months. So did you know that most SSI awards, they automatically deduct a 1/3 reduction from that award because the individual is living with their family? So you offset that by demonstrating that the individual is paying their fair share. You have a rental agreement, and then that's going to bump up that award from that having 2/3 of the award to the full award. So if any of y'all are in that boat, like you've already had Social Security, but you're looking at getting 540 something instead of 840 something, then send me an email and I can send you the rental agreement. There's another form. I love sending Social Security forms that are their forms because they go, oh my gosh, this is my Social Security form. And they know what to do with it. So there's a form that goes with that rental agreement that helps expedite that process to that increase. So if that's in the boat you're in, just send me an email. I'll be happy to send those documents to you. I did want to spend just a quick minute on voc rehab. If your loved one is interested in work, voc rehab, that's their wheelhouse. This is from the Department of Labor. So they have a strong interest in providing supports. So the process, the intake is pretty universal. You do the application, you do some assessments, figure out what your level of need is, and then we're going to develop a service plan based on those needs. So typically the service plans will include supported or customized employment, transportation sometimes, to and from the job, personal social adjustments. So there's a variety of services that you can get through voc rehab. There are also other work incentive programs. Generally, if an individual is on a now comp waiver track, I really don't recommend Ticket to Work. Ticket to Work is a program that provides, it's like a quid pro quo. You're going to get some work support. You're also going to not have to go through a continuing disability medical review, which is pretty big, but you're committing to come off of benefits. Well, guess what? If your individual is on that now comp waiver track and they have significant developmental disabilities, they're likely going to always need those benefits. So a Ticket to Work may not necessarily be the most appropriate option. A PASS is a plan to achieve self-sufficiency, and this is basically a way of using some of your monies to help fund things that are going to advance you in your career. So let's say if there was a one-year certification program that's going to help you get a higher paying job, then you can work with your voc rehab counselor to develop a pass, get that signed off on the pass cadre. It's approved through Social Security, and it's going to allow you to save some monies without necessarily impacting negatively your Social Security award in pursuit of that plan. So there's some really good work incentives tied to Social Security that I really encourage people to maximize. If you have Social Security or a Social Security beneficiary and you're interested in working, please, I strongly encourage you to have a benefits counselor. These are called WIPA counselors, work incentive planning and assistance. The counselor is a CWIC, a certified work incentive counselor. And having a CWIC is very important because y'all, this gets complicated really fast. Remember, there's very separate and different rules for SSI and SSDI. So if you're working with SSI, you're going to have monthly calculations. It feels a lot like taxes. You may have general income exclusions and deductions. If you're a student, a full-time student, you may be able to use a student earned income exclusion. You may have impairment related work expenses. There's a lot of work incentives and deductions that you can use to maximize your SSI. You don't need to do that with SSDI. SSDI has trial work periods. There's a 9-month trial work period, and you have, during those 9 months, you have the opportunity to have your SSDI check plus as much earnings as you can make, even if it goes beyond substantial gainful activities. Following the 9 months, you enter a 36-month period of extended eligibility. So that's 3 years of, it's an all or nothing proposition. Are you working above substantial gainful activity, which in 2022 is earning gross earnings $1,350. So if you're above SGA, you don't get your SSDI check. If you're below it, you do. So it's more of an either or proposition, but you really need a counselor to map all of this out. So you get a WIPA counselor. There are 3 WIPA providers in the state of Georgia. BDI is one, Infinity is the other, and Walton Options is the third. All referrals come from the same way. You have to go through the Ticket to Work helpline. So you call this 866-968-7842 Ticket to Work helpline, and through that helpline, they're going to take information to pre-screen you, make sure you get to the right provider. So if you're working with Social Security, make sure you do WIPA. Basically, Social Security is either the blue book, which is all things to get Social Security, and the red book, which is how do you maintain your Social Security while you're working. If you're working and you have Social Security, just Google Social Security Red Book, and that's going to pop up with all the rules and regulations for you. I did want to note that 14 is actually the threshold year for transition planning. A lot of times people think it's 16. They really start focusing on things at 18, but it's actually 14. You can go to GVRA at age 14 and say, hey, I would really like to work when I'm 18. What kind of employment readiness programs do you have? What kind of pre-employment training do you offer? Do you have anything in the summer when I'm not at school that's going to help me get the skills so that when I turn 18, I'm going to have a greater likelihood for employment? So 14 is actually a threshold year for transition planning, not only in the school setting, but also through voc rehab. I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit more difficulty with my, there we go, other futures planning. I did want to just mention briefly these other aspects of futures planning. Guardianship, that's a big question. Generally, when an individual turns 18, they're going to be viewed as a competent adult, even though they may not, in fact, be competent, but they're legally competent until they have been adjudicated incompetent. So that means going through the process of a hearing through guardianship. In Gwinnett County, the Gwinnett County Probate Court manages the guardianship process. And pre-pandemic, they used to do these really amazing workshops. I would certainly look at that as a potential resource if you're interested in guardianship. A supplemental needs trust. Remember, if you're on that now comp track where you expect as part of the life care plan for your individual that they're going to have a now or comp Medicaid waiver, that means they're always going to have to maintain Medicaid eligibility, which again, no more resources more than $2,000. So what happens if they're the beneficiary of your $1 million life insurance policy? If that goes straight to them, bada bing. If they have the waiver, bye-bye waiver, because you've exceeded that Medicaid eligibility threshold. Instead, you divert that beneficiary status to the supplemental needs trust. So it's a supplemental needs trust with that individual, all that information as the primary beneficiary of the life insurance policy. That ensures that the money is in a safe harbor. So the whole point of having the supplemental needs trust is having those monies safeguarded where they're not viewed as accountable resource. Same thing with an ABLE account. So an ABLE account, and you can just look at that. It's in Georgia, it's called Stable. So you can set up that ABLE account. Again, you're able to deposit up to $15,000 annually. And if your loved one is working, they can put in an additional almost more than $12,000 each year. So it's more like a savings account that's going past that $2,000 mark. But again, it's not counted as accountable resource. So ABLE accounts are wonderful, flexible tools in that regard. A letter of intent is basically like a kind of like a codicil to your will. Your will is about your distribution of your assets and property. The letter of intent is, what your wishes are for the regard to the care of your loved one. And I strongly encourage people to develop a life care plan. We are currently piloting a process where we're embedding the benefits analysis and the benefits acquisition into a life care planning process. I think this is going to be the wave of the future, where you have a person-centered plan. It incorporates all the benefits and financial analysis. It's looking at resources in the community, and it's looking at those elements of a letter of intent of what's going to happen when I'm gone. Who's going to take care of them? So those are some dynamics related to futures planning that we want to look at. I did want to just do a shout out. The Georgia Community Trust. There are two pooled trusts in the state of Georgia. One is the Georgia Community Trust. The other is through the ARC of Georgia. A community pooled trust has to be managed by a nonprofit organization. This is a very unique setup, specifically geared and earmarked for individuals with developmental disabilities and other disabilities, physical disabilities, to ensure that they have the opportunity to safeguard some of those resources. So it's a much more cost-effective way to set up a supplemental needs trust, because you're joining a trust already in process versus creating it from scratch. One limitation of a pooled trust is that it doesn't manage property, so it manages all liquid assets, but certainly something to think about. If you would like a referral to the Georgia Community Trust, I'd be happy to provide that information as well. So I left 15 minutes, woohoo, to answer any questions that you might have. I did want to leave this slide up. This has my email address, my office number, and the website to our organization. So if you're interested in applying for family support, you would certainly go to that www.bobbydodd.org and begin that family support application process. At this time, I'm going to just open up the floor to answer any questions that you might have. And again, thank you very much for this opportunity to share this information.
Thank you so much for giving us this information. We did have two questions come in. One of them is in regards to if you were applying for SSI and the adult is like a college student and they are getting they're getting scholarships. Does that affect any of their income like a job would have?
I haven't seen that situation where someone who's in college and is on a college with a scholarship or the scholarship monies, that's not income per se for the individual. That's money earmarked for education. So I don't think that would be counted as a resource or as income.
Okay, thank you. And our second question that came in was about the advocacy strategy. Do you think you could provide or point out to our viewers about, is there some kind of outline on how to kind of get that organized? Or are there additional resources that could be provided to
Sure.
plan a better advocacy strategy?
Absolutely. One of the things that I do, I would encourage you to reach out to BDI for my services. Again, I want to roll out this life care planning piece for folks, but having an advocacy strategy is integral to that. The strategy that I follow with individuals is I have, and I learned this the hard way with my son. Remember how I had to do it for him? And oh my God, it was just so frightening and stressful. And I quit my job and I became a provider so I could figure out how the system worked, because I just didn't feel like I was getting the information that I needed. And so I ultimately reverse engineered a lot of this processes. So I have an assessment that I use with families. It's called a determination of need. It's a functional, adaptive functional assessment. And I use it both to help with securing SSI, and I use it to help as an advocacy strategy for a waiver. It does incorporate the planning considerations used by the DBHDD. And what it does is it goes through the activities of daily living and behavioral issues and general health risks. It's more or less tailored off of like a supports intensity scale and a health risk screening tool. So it's sort of an amalgam of those types of assessments. But at the end of it, it takes a good 2 hours to do it. At the end of it, we know pretty clearly what the support needs are and what the services that are needed, and we can see where that advocacy strategy is going to emerge from that. And it's different for everybody. You know, my son, I focused on his behavior. I focused on the fact that he's this big guy. He's more than 6 foot. He's more than 240 pounds. And I was like, are you serious that your action plan is for me to outrun him if he's having a meltdown? That's your plan? Because it doesn't feel like a plan to me. It doesn't make me feel very safe. So can we work on that? Let's get some other services in place. So, you know, that was my point of emphasis. So what your point of emphasis may be, it may be behavioral, maybe something else. I helped his friend that was in school. She's a sweet girl. And she didn't have any behavioral issues, but guess what? She's very, very vulnerable. And her mom worked so hard on teaching her not to open the door to strangers. Yeah, you know, she's left home and FedEx guy shows up. There she is, opening the door, and nothing happened. Thank God nothing happened, but it could have. It could have. And we used that aspect of her vulnerability as a means to, look, we need to have these supports in place because she can't be left home alone. This is what happens when she's left home alone. So everybody's advocacy strategy is different. I would certainly, if you're looking for some support with that, we provide the benefit services to families under the auspices of Family Support Services. So if you are in Gwinnett County and you don't have a family support services provider, you can, you know, secure family support through BDI, and then you can request benefit services. Let's say you already have a provider. If you have in community or someone else as a provider of family support, but you still need these benefits assistance because you would like a life care plan or you want an advocacy strategy or whatnot, then I would still encourage you to apply to BDI, and you're going to request the benefits services, and you're going to treat it like it's private pay. But guess what? I have scholarships. I have scholarships about for at least 40 individuals left for the remainder of this fiscal year. So it's a great opportunity for you to apply and get one of those scholarships. And that means that you get that assessment and the planning efforts and all of the consultation is no cost to you.
Great. That's great information. And I know many of our attendees will probably be contacting you soon to get additional information about that. Great.
Yay.
I don't see that we have any other questions, but I will make sure that your information is attached with all of our videos and with your email and phone number, and let them reach out to you if they have additional questions.
That's perfect. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much
I
again, Anna,
appreciate
for
you for having me. Thank you.
yes, we're very happy at Gwinnett County Public Library to have this offered to our community. Very valuable information to share.
Thank you.
Thank you again.